get started. Just the topic of today, we'll start with that and then go into some introductions here. And then after that, go into some exciting topics we want to go through. But let me just kind of get started with introducing the topic, how to build a successful GRC program to help reduce your risk posture. And what is GRC anyways? We get that question a lot. Not everybody knows what governance, risk, and compliance is, so we'll touch on that a little bit on the fundamentals there, and then talk about some of, I guess, the pain points and way, the world is solving some of those challenges today in a more modern and automated way. But before we get started, I'm Yair Solow, CEO of Centraleyes and co-founder. Thank you for being with us today, and I am honored and pleased to have a distinguished guest here. Sagar, I'll let you introduce yourself, but Sagar and I already have gotten to know each other quite well, and learned a lot about each other's companies. And I will not steal your thunder and let you go for the introduction.
No worries. Thanks, Yair, and thanks for everyone who joined. Sagar Shah, Senior Manager at Corvus Insurance, Senior Manager of GRC at Corvus Insurance. A little bit about my background. I started off in auditing, IT controls, cyber controls, moved into more implementation and cyber advisory work. Realized that, I've been out in consulting life and advisory life for a while. So I moved in-house into GRC and have been in the tech space as part of GRC since then.
Amazing.
Excited to be here to talk through GRC.
Yeah. Not everybody's so excited sometimes to discuss GRC, but I think you and I are seeing it from a different angle, and we'll love to share more of what we're seeing in the world today. Maybe before we kind of go deeper in to some of the new stuff, maybe just from the fundamental side, like what is GRC, and what does that world look like? I'll give my side, then I'd love to hear your thoughts, Sagar. But for me, governance, risk, and compliance is obviously a wide world about operational risk that's being managed by organizations that have a lot of silos and different processes, people, and technologies and places that all have to at the end work together in an efficient way. And without a proper system in place that's helping create governance there, and then also measuring potential risk factors as well as meeting regulatory and certified compliance, you're going to fall short somewhere, and then have a very big setback to your business that could be something you didn't foresee. And by managing this properly, you'll be in a place where you're much better prepared both to avoid those situations, but also to deal with them when they happen. And just bringing it, kind of double clicking it into our world, we're very focused obviously on the cyber risk and compliance element of GRC. That is a world that has become pretty much the number one operational risk across enterprises globally. There are very few risks that could knock a business out in one shot, but cyber is certainly one of them. And unfortunately, we see that all happening more and more. I think that what we're working on here is something that is exciting because it's helping not the largest organizations, but also smaller and mid-sized organizations address this in a much more mature and comprehensive way, leveraging technology, automation, and just better practices in place. But we'd love to hear kind of, what does GRC look like from you from a fundamental place in your world, Sagar?
No, definitely. I couldn't agree more. I think when I think of GRC at a high level, what I think about is, the business has its objectives, has their goal. So making sure that the security and the IT goals align with those business objectives. So it's working in tandem. And then that in parallel with managing the security risks that the organization faces, as well as meeting any industry and contractual or regulatory needs. At a high level, that's what I think GRC covers, specifically governance. Like governance, I think of as building and developing the programs to address those security risks and then supporting them through those governance structures, like procedures, policies, controls, so that there is a structure around those programs. And these are enterprise-wide programs. From a risk perspective, it's really, identifying, analyzing, supporting the mitigation and management of security risks that the organization faces. And every organization there can be common risks. There's the risks that are specific based on its industry, based on the field that it's in, the type of data it collects. So just understanding what security risks are applicable. And then from a compliance perspective, compliance and managing regulations is an ongoing thing. I feel like every year there's more and more regulations that come up, but just making sure that whatever controls and processes you have are in line with the regulations that your organization needs to adhere to.
Yeah, completely a great description there. And I think that point about compliance is one of the biggest challenges in today's market because, the regulatory landscape is continuing to evolve literally by month. We just saw ISO put out a new release recently of their 2701 framework there, and you see that across the board with privacy laws and information security acts, even on a global level. Almost every country in the world, even in third world countries, you see this, laws going out, affecting just about every business on earth. So that's something that I think that we see is impacting a lot of companies globally, and in the US, which sometimes lags in this, in this when it comes to privacy. Starting to catch up now at a state level. You see more and more states issuing privacy acts there, and that's starting to affect the market as well. And by the end of next year, you're going to have probably close to 20 states already with privacy laws in place. So another challenge is on the horizon for a lot of US-based businesses. Maybe as just asking you, Sagar, what are some of the pain points that you're seeing in the GRC market today and the way it's being addressed? And where do people kind of get stuck very often when they're trying to either implement for the first time or mature their program?
Yeah, I think I see a few areas. Both I've faced it at companies I've been at, especially smaller to mid-sized organizations, as well as larger companies, that might have a bigger team. But I think the biggest pain point that I've seen is where to start. There's lots of regulations, there's lots that can be done, but you can't take on too much. So understanding where is it that I should start, what should I focus on, what frameworks to build it around, and getting a more longer term vision of what GRC looks like, and doing it step by step helps, as well as making sure how to obtain executive support, how to make sure that the needs of security and the needs of GRC is being translated appropriately for finance, for budget, or to the enterprise of like, hey, these are programs that will need to loop in HR, need to loop in procurement, need to loop in IT, etc. So the buy-in, including engineering, getting that buy-in across.
Yeah, I think that last point about the buy-in and just the executive kind of support is a very big challenge, because I think at the end of the day, very often, GRC and cyber in general also is seen as a cost center that, just kind of spends money. Nobody really understands how it's protecting. And it's only after like a breach or things like that that people feel the real pain of not doing those. But I think that getting that buy-in and not just realizing what the potential risks are and these kind of the scare factor or the scare tactics that are used to do that, but even seeing the enablement of business sometimes through better, risk management, better compliance certifications, right? You see a lot of software companies today, meaning SOC 2 and, ISO 27001 mentioned, NIST and things like that. And, implementing those best practices is certainly something that can help you win business today in the market. We as a company face it every single time we have a new customer, right? We have the largest banks in the world using our platform today. And none of these banks are going to use your platform if you're not properly certified by well-known kind of accounting firm, if you are not practicing at the highest level of hygiene when it comes to cyber. So I think that part is definitely a piece that we're seeing also. I think another piece that we see is very often in that that getting started stage. So not just where do you get started from, which I think there are more and more control frameworks out there today, like the NIST or CIS or things like that, that are helping you build out kind of a structure to work with. But it's also that implementation and onboarding piece that becomes a very big challenge, right? It can take, and people have had an experience in this very often, saw it firsthand, months. It could be 6 months, it could be a year or 2 years sometimes to implement the proper GRC platform. And that's something that, we've been heavily focused on as a company of how do we fix that problem, because that's a big problem, especially for small and mid enterprises in the market. The data collection analysis is another piece that we see as a very big pain point, right? It's very manual today. Not just that collection piece, because everybody's dream is to just plug something in and it works. That's not going to happen in the near future. There's some of that happening, and we can talk about that later. But beyond that, right, there's actually most of the work in GRC happens after you collect the data, right? You've collected this assessment. You need to analyze it. You need to identify the gaps, build a, you know, a remediation plan, prioritize that, manage that, right? And then, you know, if you're trying to meet a risk management use case, you have to go, so then go build a risk register, which that all links to, right? That's a very, very hard thing to do on your own today, right? So I think there's a lot of automation we talked about that comes in that analysis and kind of orchestration stage and the whole workflow management, together with also integrations into like security tools and things like that. So that's just some of the pain points that we're seeing up from our side.
Yeah, and I think I can't agree more. I think one thing, starting at this, at the get-go of understanding what with the frameworks, regulations, contractual obligations, whatever it is, one thing I know that we leverage Centraleyes for, and then we really appreciate it is, we have regulatory side, regulations that at Corvus we need to adhere to. We have our own security framework that we're managing. So we use NIST CSF and CIS Top 18, like a combination of those, as our what we establish our security program over. But then we also have contractual obligations, like what our cyber insurance providers controls that they require, or what our investors require, what our stakeholders, anyone that they require. And I think a lot of the times these controls or these areas are intertwined. Like what NIST CSF calls out is pretty similar to maybe what a cyber insurer would call out. For example, MFA. MFA, I've seen across almost every single thing that we need to adhere to. And so seeing it in siloed sometimes make it like, oh, it's so much. But with Centraleyes, we were able to connect the dots between all of them and have a higher level view of like, okay, these are all the requirements. A lot of them are related. And so having that connection and have a consolidated view of all that really helps. And then from that, we're able to take that and say, do our current state and say, hey, this is where we are right now. These are the key areas that we want to focus on. And then that goes into like, what is our priority?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And I'm going to share my screen every so often as you talk about some of the things that you guys have implemented, because I think it's interesting to see. You're actually referring to the smart mapping feature we have in our platform today, which is an automated control crosswalking feature. So, once you've done one assessment with this, then you can automatically have that map to tens of other frameworks that you're managing there. And you, like you said, you have a lot of overlap and redundancy happening because it's not just MFA. It's probably, if you do a application for, insurance, it's going to be 50% of your controls that you already have collected, if not more. And the same is true when you're doing like NIST, ISO, SOC 2, PCI, FFIC, and so on and on, right? So these different regulations are going to, help you achieve different goals. But if you can create efficiencies between them, that's where I think there's, a big opportunity, because you can achieve a lot more. And you can see on the screen here, this is kind of the collection center in our platform. That's what Sagar was talking about as far as where you manage these frameworks. You have the NIST CSF here. You can see here that, SOC 2 is already starting to fill out automatically based on that. Only, 20% of NIST was done here, and already 8% of SOC 2 was done here without a human being actually touching anything here. And our platform even suggests other frameworks here that are mapping in real time here and showing you what the coverage is on those frameworks. So it's pretty cool here that you might have even not planned to do a certain regulation or framework, but then you see you're so close when you finish with this, because there's such great overlap there, that you can leverage that and then put in place much more robust kind of frameworks and coverage there. So definitely an interesting point there, I think, around the mapping functionality. Maybe just also around the automation piece, thinking about areas that you see. Have you seen the market? Maybe a question for you, Sagar. The integration of security tools and how that can help leverage some of your risk assessments there. What are your thoughts on kind of that direction of being able to automate at least part of the control assessment here? So we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as the amount of work in GRC grows, their amount of assessments that need to be done grows as well. And a lot of these assessments, may start with security, but it's really looping in everyone across the enterprise to get the right answers, to get the right evidence. And if, fingers crossed, and luckily right now, we're not in the point at Corvus where we have auditors coming in from like a SOC 2 perspective. But, in my past roles, when those things come in, they might come to security, they might come to GRC, be like, hey, show us evidence of this control. And then you have to manually go reach out to someone, email, try to set up time. It's very manual. I think having those integrations where the evidence is already documented, it's already coming in automatically, and I will show that. But B, having an owner identified and knowing exactly who to go to, where to go, makes it also easier for the stakeholder to say, okay, I already know what this is asking. I know exactly where to do it. And especially in the automated integrations, if it's continuously also checking that is this control being met outside of when the auditor comes in throughout the year continuously, if there's an issue, we can immediately resolve it versus having to go back at the time when we need to make sure things are good.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because it's moving from like a static kind of point in time assessment and like audit style approach to compliance and risk to a much more continuous ongoing, which obviously makes you more secure. You're not waiting till that end of year audit to then fix up everything last second. You're continuously managing that. And when you get to that end of year audit and the auditor comes, you literally can like export a report for the auditor here and just provide it to them with all the evidence ready to go. And the collection process here, like you were talking about, combines that integration piece here of automated sources of data that are checking different IPs and different scans here, creating a control effectiveness. And actually, in some cases, and you can see here the integration live here, they're actually answering questions here, right? So, like you said, you can actually reduce some of that manual work here, make it more continuous. You can attach evidence as well and things like that here, and then it's very easy for an auditor at the end to get all the data they need. And then anything else you don't want them to see, obviously you keep to your internal staff. But this really helps kind of orchestrate that whole piece of the data collection and sharing, when you have that end of year audit. So definitely, cool stuff there, I think, on the kind of integration piece and the leveraging that compliance automation and tools and evidence collection with your risk practices there. Maybe talk about a little bit of other reports, just like thinking about, right, we do all this work, but what are our desired reports? What is that outcome that we're really trying to get? Let's start with like a risk management use case, because risk and compliance are a little bit different. But when you're running a risk management framework and then program, what are you looking to achieve at the end of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think really is taking what we have in the risk register, which is a lot of information, but into a graphic or into a format, like a dashboard format that can easily be presented when we talk to senior leadership, when we talk to the board of, this is what our security risk is at this point. These are the different focus areas or projects that we're working on. And over time, this is how our risk is being improved. This is how, over time, the work that we're doing is coming to fruition in terms of reducing the risk that our organization faces. And then a broader view, which, and I'll use your screen as an example, is, there might be a lot of critical risks. There might be high, medium, but showing that security risks are always going to be growing. There's always going to be new threats. There's always going to be new vulnerabilities that come into play. But so security is not a one and done thing. So I think having a visualization of that helps, so that the impact or the impact that security has to the organization can be seen. But also, it's not that security is letting everything stay critical. We're addressing things, and it's a continuous thing. And having that dashboard view, I think, really helps with that.
Yeah, so and just maybe for those who are less familiar with risk registers, right? Risk registers really where you're going to document your risk scenarios of your organization. And this is where it's very different than compliance, right? Because this is very relevant to your organization. You're going to document risk scenarios, which maybe everybody faces and maybe only you face, but you're going to try to build out a whole register here, which really is your own risk register. And you're going to document both the inherent exposure across each scenario. So, what is our kind of starting point there of exposure, just based on the industry, the type of business, how we operate, and other factors like that. And calculating that impact of a attack on us versus the probability of that attack happening. And then looking at, the residual exposure, which is kind of the after, right? We've implemented controls here. We've measured those controls here. And then now we can see how low is our residual exposure. In this example here, you can see this is ransomware, right? Everybody's familiar with that. When we open this risk up, we can see the related assets here, the impact and probability, which creates an inherent exposure. All the controls in place that are linked back to the collection process we saw before from the tools and from the surveys are automatically going to calculate what is the effectiveness of the controls here in place, which is then going to automatically calculate what is our residual exposure here. And at the same time, we're also going to give a visual and also clickable output here to the tasks that we have open on this risk scenario. So what are those gaps that we need to mitigate now, right? That can be seen in our remediation center here, and then manage those tickets as well, right? So the ability to kind of to bring this kind of ecosystem of, each risk into the platform here in a way that it is living and breathing. Because if you imagine for a second doing this in a spreadsheet, it's very difficult to keep this up to date all the time, right? One time you can build this, but then imagine you're documenting tens to hundreds of risk scenarios, and then things are changing every day. Some of it's tools based, some of it's survey based, some of it's remediation things that are happening, some of it's new threats and risks that have didn't exist in the past and came about now. So the ability here to have a platform and a tool that helps you manage this at scale is quite powerful. Maybe I'll kind of just mention, one of the unique things about the risk register in our case here is that our risk register is the only one that builds itself up. So if you run a NIST CSF assessment in the platform today, right, a little bit under 70 scenarios will pre-populate themselves into the platform here. And it gives you just this great starting point and a backbone to kind of, document scenarios that we've already used our research of years working with clients as to what are the most common risk scenarios in the market. You as a company then can edit and change those to fit your world a little bit more accurately. When they're not perfect fit, you can also remove them, but then you can also build your own automated scenarios. But the idea is that all this is living and breathing all the time, so that, like Sagar said, you can just like literally hover over here, see what these items are, right? Click on them, and then see what their status is. So I think from the risk register perspective, that's one output that we're looking for here. Another one that I'll call out that maybe again, Sagar, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, is kind of a central dashboard to give you kind of visibility into what your current workflow statuses are, your exposure level, and so on. Maybe some thoughts on this piece here of how this has helped you kind of manage the program from a more strategic standpoint.
Yeah, no, definitely. And actually, before I touch on this, if you go back to the risk register, one thing that I found unique and I really appreciated is if you click on one of the risks on the left-hand side, just one of them where it shows shows the financial impact, if that was selected. I think one question that we frequently get is, okay, what does this mean for the business? Like, what is the loss? And sometimes it's hard to give a number because it's bound to change. But if we can give an estimate based on using the same format for everything. So if we create a primary loss of, let's say, whatever examples we put in here, and we're saying the loss is 130K, and then we say the cost to remediate this risk is bringing on a tool and doing XYZ, and the cost of that is 100K. I think presenting it in that sense is like, here is a loss, here's a probability of the loss of this occurring. The cost to remediate is this much. This is how much money we're proposing to either mitigate that risk, bring that risk down to an acceptable level. But having a number tagged to it, I think helps in our conversations, especially with finance, when we talk about the budgetary constraints. To your point, that security might be asking for more budget, but having numbers tied to the loss as well is helpful.
Yeah, and I think leveraging the FAIR model here is what this calculator that you saw here is something that makes this much more achievable. This is a very complex thing to do on your own. We've made it as easy as possible. It is still some data inputs here that you have to put in, but at the end we brought it down to the 6 primary loss kind of factors here that help calculate that from productivity, response, replacement, competitive advantage, and then find the judgment and reputation here, all then get calculated here into this primary loss exposure number, which, like you said, gives you another data point here to prioritize what we want to focus on from a remediation standpoint forward. So yeah, definitely a great point there. Then maybe coming back to the the upper deck screen here, this is really kind of that bird's eye view of the organization, right? So you can kind of get real-time visibility into what is our risk exposure level, our compliance status is, where we're up to an assessment and remediation. For you, Sagar, kind of what's the difference, I guess, from the before and after, right? When you did or didn't have a dashboard in your case, and how does that affect some of the things, decision-making processes?
Yeah, I would say there's 2 main areas that we've seen efficiencies in. One is time. When to my point earlier, is NIST CSF and CIS Top 18, we would do assessments in Excel, like we would do our assessments, but then figuring out what does that mean from last year? Like, how much did we improve? How much did are we in compliance with? How much are there gaps that we're working on? Things like that. All the time it took to create those dashboards and create that view that we can present to senior leadership, we can present to the board to show the improvements that we're making. It was like a full-time job. I was just continuously doing that, and it was taking a lot of time. And here, assessments, yeah, still have a manual portion or some sort to do the assessments, but at least all that data is being brought in, and I can quickly go in and, using this example, show that here, this is how much we are compared to the industry. This is how much compared to last year. How much improvements we're making in the different areas, and I think there is, by function, where if we do it by NIST CSF, I think a lot of organizations use NIST CSF and the 5 functions that it represents, and this we can easily show, like, through our investments, we have increased our maturity level in respond or recover, and we're good if something were to occur, but we really need to focus on identify or protect or detect or whatever the data shows, and it's having data to support it from a visualization that, or a graphical representation that the board can easily understand or senior leadership can easily understand, I think helps with the takeaways that we have.
Yeah, I think this piece here is a perfect example of that ability to track progress over time. Like, this is impossible with any GRC or obviously spreadsheet today. So being able to pick any point in the history of your GRC program and say, well, where were we back then? Where are we today across, like you said, functions or domains, and there's other ways to break this down, is, a huge advantage of leveraging a platform that's archiving that data and giving you real-time reporting also. Because, very often it's hard, and we talked about that before, right? Cyber and GRC are seen as cost centers. Nobody can really quantify that progress, right? It's quiet, right? If you're doing a great job, nothing's happening, right? To the naked eye. So how do you now articulate and communicate upwards? Hey, look where we were, look how much stronger we are today. Here's where we're deficient, actually we need to improve further, and so on. And this is a great both management piece, but then also a way to communicate that upwards. I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I know if there's anybody, any Q&A that people have questions about, please, feel free to submit that now. I'll also mention that, following this session, if anybody is interested in the 30-minute session with our risk team, we'd be happy to facilitate that, to learn more about how we can help automate and, orchestrate your cyber risk and compliance program. There'll be a link at the end posted here shortly. But I guess the last 2 minutes we'll use for some questions that have come in here. So here I see one question here, and this is to you, Sagar. The Corvus questionnaire aligned with existing frameworks or regulations?
It not one-to-one, I will say. It's not like a direct, like, hey, we pull everything. I think, from a Corvus side, we use best practices, but I think the regulations or the frameworks that Centraleyes has, or that anyone can use, being agnostic of NIST CSF or CIS or ISO, SOC, whatever framework that an organization might align with, the questions that Corvus asks align with those. So I think you could make a one-to-one connection, whether you go through a tool or not, but I think obviously with the tool, it would make it easier.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, like, the platform here obviously would allow you to segue from, the NIST controls over to any application that you want to manage, and very easily kind of map that data. But, I think, like you said, and as we see it across the insurance industry in general, is that there's pretty strong alignment today to those different standards. It's kind of taking the best of breed from each one of those and, bringing it into a pretty robust questionnaire most of the time. So I think, you'll see a lot of that alignment, not just by Corvus, but, across that industry in general.
I think
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, one thing a question that came through that I know we didn't touch on, and it's only a minute, but was around the intelligence feeds and alerts that Centraleyes has. And I think in general, I think most security people know they will sign up to a bunch of like platforms or forums to make sure that they're staying on top of security changes, and not across just governance or compliance, but also, like security feeds. And I know I have a bunch on Slack that I look at, and also on Centraleyes. I think the fact that you guys bring them in is something, if you want to talk more about.
Yeah,
the platform.
On that piece, we have a dedicated research team that's collecting qualitative information on the industries and types of companies that are, clients today. So it spreads across all kinds of different sectors there. There's actually a free intelligence report you can sign up for on our website, but through the platform, you're getting, a more robust view of real-time intelligence both on your own posture and also on the industry as well. So you're up to speed on things like, the latest threats, vulnerabilities that are spreading as well, in 0 days, obviously, but then also things like regulatory change management, which is a big area, right? As new regulations come out, as ones get updated, our platform and our team become your eyes and ears to make sure that you're up to speed both on those changes coming and how they're going to affect you. So definitely, something that we can help with there. Yeah, I think we're just about out of time here. Maybe just the last question here: how many third-party vendors can organizations manage on the platform? Well, I guess somebody took a look at the website because we didn't talk about the third-party piece today. But yeah, we have a vendor risk solution here as a second product in our platform. There's no real limitation. You can manage thousands of vendors in the platform today. We have, some of the largest organizations in the world doing so. I think that also is going to leverage what Sagar was talking about, which is those intelligence feeds together with, self-attestation, workflow management on vendors using different control frameworks there for vendor risk management. I'm going to conclude here. First of all, Sagar, thank you so much for your time. Always love talking to you, privately. So I'm happy that everybody got to, a little piece of your wisdom today, and really appreciate all the insight. For everybody who joined today, really appreciate your time. And, like we mentioned, feel free to hit that link if you're interested in learning more. And we hope to see you soon. Stay safe and stay warm in the winter. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Yair. Have a great one, everyone. Bye.